Hey guys, welcome to the next section of the Unreal Engine Beginner series. In this one, we're going to be learning blueprints, which is basically the programming system for Unreal Engine. It's very easy. In this one, we're going to be learning how to do print string and variables. So let's get started. Alright, so before we get started, I want to show you guys how to even create a blueprint in the first place. So if you look on the very top, there's two different type of blueprints. A level blueprint, and then you got blueprint classes, okay? So if you look on the very top right here, if you hover over all the way to this little branch thing called list of world blueprints available, you can open level blueprint like so. And basically what a level blueprint is you can create blueprints in this editor, and basically level blueprints are only blueprints for this level. So if I want to like play certain like music on the certain level, then I would do it through the level blueprint, not through the character. Does that make sense? Hopefully that does. Anyways, let me show you guys the next type of blueprint. So go to content. We're gonna make a new folder. I'm just gonna call it blueprints. Let me respell that because that is incorrect. Make sure to set this to a color that will make sense for you. Or I could do like a red. Okay, so then go ahead and open it up. So if we right click, just scroll all the way up to where it says blueprint class, okay? If you click this, it's gonna let us choose a class. So let me go over what this is really quick. So we have an actor is an object that can be placed or spawned in the world. So basically any object inside our game is an actor, okay? And then a pawn is an actor that can be possessed or receive input from a controller. So basically any actor that can be moved around like a character. And then a character is a type of pawn that includes the ability to walk around. So a character is a more advanced pawn. You can walk around and do that type of stuff. So that'd be like your main player typically in most type of games. And then player controller is the type of controller, the settings for controlling the player. And then game mode base and all this other stuff. Don't worry about it too much. Don't worry if this doesn't really make sense, you're going to understand it more later. But for now, we can actually do blueprints inside of the main character. So if you go to where it says third person, double click it, go to blueprints, we have the default BP underscore third person character. If you double click it, this is the default blueprint actor. This is a character type of class, and this is already default inside Unreal Engine. And as you can see, it has blueprints for moving by default. And we can add more blueprints to it if we want to change anything. If you go on the viewport, you can change things in here like what the player looks like, but for now we'll just keep it the same. So first we'll go to event graph, and the first thing I want to teach you is how to do print strings. By the way, right click to move around this thing. So basically how it works is you have an event, and off of that event you fire a node. That's how blueprints kind of works. So let's say you right click, let's say we want it to do something when I click 1 on my keyboard, okay? So you right click and you can look up a node. So if we search up 1 on the keyboard, you can find 1, just click 1 right here. And you can scroll in and out to zoom in on it if you want. And then we have for pressed and released, and we could drag off each of these nodes, okay? So pressed is basically anything that fires off of this node happens when you press 1. Anything that fires off of this node happens when you release 1, okay? So let's say I want to teach you guys what a print string is really quick. So if you right click and click and type in print string. So basically a string is just another name for text, okay? And it's just a type of text, okay? So it would say print string hello. Basically it's going to print a string or text onto your screen, and the whole reason for printing strings is so you can test things. Like for example, I want to make sure that the one input actually works, so off of pressed I can use print string, and if it prints the string hello, then I know that it worked. If it didn't, then it won't work. And we can do the same thing for released. So if you left click this, click Control D to duplicate it, drag it out, and then just drag released into print string. So we could put, for when we click pressed, I want to say pressed And when we release the key, I want it to say released. So it should, if my code worked, it should say pressed when I click 1, and then when I release, it should say released. So if you compile and save this, you can actually click on these 3 dots next to the play button right here. If you click on new editor window pi, it's going to open up your own a different screen. I can expand this if I want. And if I click 1, it's going to say pressed. When I let go, it says released. Just like that. So printing strings can sound kind of useless. This is kind of boring, you might think. However, printing strings is very important, especially it'll make sense to you more why for debugging and stuff. So it's very important that you learn this skill early on. So now let's get to variables and how we can use them with print string. So a variable is a little bit more complicated, but basically think of a box. So a box can have anything inside of it. And that box is defined by the value inside of the box, okay, of what it contains, whether it's paper or whatever, okay. So a variable, like if you learn it like in school, like let's say we have a variable named x, and as you guys know, x can have different numbers. It could be 10, it could be 11, based off equation. So for us, we can create our own variables and we can set values to them and use it for blueprints. So if you go to the left side right here, and then scroll down under my blueprint, scroll down to variables, and then click the plus icon. It's going to create a variable. Just name this whatever you want. I'll just call this, we'll start off with a different type of variables. So I'll just call this my first variable for now. We can change the name later. So let's go over all the different type of variables, okay? So this one right here, if you go to the right side under details, you change the name here. You can look at variable type. So this is a Boolean, and basically a Boolean is a true or false statement. And don't worry if this doesn't all make sense. I'm gonna be going over each of these ones today, at least the main ones. But we go over Boolean, integer, float, string, text, and name. We can do that too. And we can also do vector maybe in another tutorial. I don't know if we'll do this one. So basically a Boolean is like a true or false, and then an integer, it's just it's a whole number basically. It could be negative or positive, but there can't be decimals. And then a float is basically any number, so it can have any decimal inside of it basically. And then a name is just a text name, a string, and a text. They're kind of all the same thing, but you can always convert name and strings to each other. So like for print string, we can put a name inside of it, if that kind of makes sense. This will make more sense later, but let's get started with the Booleans. So we'll call this my my first Boolean. And basically, if you compile, we can decide if it's true. So on this checkbox, if you click it, it's going to be true. If you unclick it, it's going to be false. If you hover over it, it's going to say false or true, okay? So by default, our first Boolean is going to be false. Let's drag this out a little bit here. So we need to be able to ask ourselves if it's true or not. So we basically use a new node called branch. So if you right click and use branch, this is basically an if-else statement inside of Unreal Engine. And how it works is like basically if whatever condition we put inside of here is true, we can fire off of this node. If it's false, we fire off of this node. So basically it's asking whatever condition we put in here, is it true or false? And if it's true, we want to do this, and we want to do something else if it's false. So, and you can also just hold B and left click to drag out a branch, by the way. And then just click delete to delete it if you want. So off of pressed, we want to use a branch. So basically we're going to check if something is true or false. And that condition is my first Boolean. So if you hold this and you left click and drag it, it's going to ask you to get it or set it. For now, right now we're just going to get it. So when we get it, it's kind of a little bit confusing, but we're just getting the information of my first Boolean so that we can put into the condition. And if you drag it out and you set it, from here, this is where we set the Boolean if we want it to be true or false, okay? That's basically how you set the info of the variable. Sorry, not the variable. This is how you set the information of the variable. This is how you get the information of the variable, okay? So if we drag my first boolean into condition, it's going to ask, is our first boolean true or false? And by default, we set it to false, right? So it's going to be firing the code off of false. So if we drag the code from false to here, and then true to print string, basically when it's false, it's going to say whatever we want to say. Let's just say we're going to say variable is false. And then let's say if it's true, we want to say variable is true. Okay? So by default, it's false, right? So it's going to say, it should say variable is false if our code is correct. So compile and save. And if I click play and then click 1, it's going to say variable is false because the boolean is set to false by default. Okay? Let's say I set it to true. I compile and save. I click play, click 1. It says variable is true. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. That's basically booleans for you and branches. Okay? So the next one I want to teach you guys is integers. So let's add a new variable right here. And we can call it my first int. And before we get started with that, I want to teach you guys how to set variables actually really quick. So if we just drag this out, click set my first boolean. Let's say when we click 2, we want to set it to true. Okay. Right click, look for 2 on the keyboard. We can do on pressed, set it to true. And basically whenever I click 2, it's going to set it to true. So if we click 2 and then 1, it should say variable is true because we set it to true. Compile and save. So let's test this out. If you do 2, should set it to true. So now if we do 1, it's going to say variable is true. Okay? Hope that makes sense. And to see this more in action, we can print a string so we know it's working. So we can do print string. And we also got to set this to false by default. Okay. So we can do print string set bool for short for boolean to true. And then we can do compile and save and then test this out. So 2, we set it to true. 1, it's true. Okay. One thing we could do is if we wanted to churn true the first time we press 2 and then churn false the second time we press true, there's this thing called a flip-flop. So if you drag out on the press node and search up flip-flop, basically this switches off of A and B. So basically the first time you click 2, it's going to go off into A, but the second time you click 2, it's going to go off of B. So the first time we can set it to true, the second time we can search up set my, or whatever name of your variable is, first boolean, set it to false, and this time we can print a string, and we can say set bool to false. If I compile and save this, and I click play, first time 2 is going to be true, second time it's going to be false. So now it's false, it's going to say variable is false. But if I click it again, it's going to be true. Now it's true. Click it again, it's going to be false. And then we have one bug here. When I said set bool to true, it does say, okay, never mind, it does work. So if I set it to false, it's going to say it's false. If I set it to true by clicking 2 again, it's going to say variable is true. So now it does work. And let's just organize this really quick. You can left click to drag everything, by the way. Just selecting things and move it around. So we can comment our nodes so we know which is which. So if you left click and drag over everything, and then you click C, it's going to open a comment. I can name this booleans. Now comments don't do anything, they're just good for organizing so that you see the which things are for which. So I know this is for booleans. And I can click on show bubble when zoomed so that when I zoom out I still see this text booleans. Okay? And I misspelled that, so let me redo that. Okay. I can make this a little bit bigger if I want by dragging it out like so. Okay, so the next thing I want to teach you guys is how to use integers. So on my first int, which is variable type, just click the down arrow and then look for integer. Okay. And then what we can do here is we can do when the E key is pressed, so we can use a different key. So sorry, look up E keyboard. You're gonna have to scroll down a little bit until you find E. And then what we can do here is we can print a string to see what number we want it to be. Okay, so print string. And let's just say we want to print our first integer. So if you drag this out, get my first integer, drag it in here. This right here just means it's converting it from an integer into a string so it can print it out as a text, okay? And basically, we gotta compile this so that it can be an integer. And I can set this to whatever I want. So let's say I set this to 25. It's going to print out the integer and it should say 25 whenever I click E. I hope this makes sense. Alright, so if you play this out right now, click E, it's going to say 25. We can also use branches too, not just for booleans, but for integers as well. So if I delete this really quick, hold down B for a branch, and then off of pressed, use a branch, and then basically if I drag out my first end, what I could do is I could drag off of this. Now if you search up equal, the operators, under operators, go for equal, and basically if this is equal to whatever number we set here, then we drag it into the condition, then we can do something off of that, true or false. So let's say I set this to 10, okay? So if my first integer equals 10, drag this into condition. If it equals 10, then off of true, do this. Off of false, do this. So we only want to do something if it's true for this, in this case, for example. So we could say hello if we get it true, okay? If we compile and save, and you click play, and I click E, it's not going to do anything. And the reason I didn't do anything is because this is a false statement, okay? Because my first integer is 25, not 10. But if I set this to 10, and I compile and save, and I click play, it's going to say hello. And now it's true. So that's one way you can do it. So that's how you use integers. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to select everything, click C, and call it integer. Okay. So next up is a float. So add a new variable, call this my first float. And then we'll just use the F key for float. So if you right click, search up F keyboard right here. And then if you click on my first float, we need to set this variable type to a float and then compile it. And we can set this to whatever number you want. And as you see now, we can set this to like a decimal if we want to, for example. So let's say I want to do 4.5, okay? We could do the exact same thing we did here, but with a float. So I can get out a branch, and I can drag out my float. By the way, if you hold control over your variable and left click to drag it out, it's going to automatically get it instead of set it. And if you hold alt and get it out, it's going to it's going to automatically set it instead of getting it, okay? So let's say if my first float is, this time we can do is greater than, so if my first float is greater than 3, off of true, we can print a string, and we can just print the name of the float if we want to, and just drag this in here like so. And because our first float by default is 4.5, that's greater than 3, so it should say the text of the float, okay? If I compile and save this and I click F, it's going to say 4.5 because that's how much our float is, and it's greater than 3. But if I set this to something like 1, you can still do whole numbers, by the way, with floats. That's why I like floats more than integers. Compile and save. It's not going to do anything when I click F because it's less than 3, so it never met the condition, and it's going to be doing false, which we don't have anything off of false. So I hope that makes sense for floats, very simple, just like integers. I can left click everything, click C. I can just call this floats. So the next thing I want to teach you guys is we're gonna do my first name. Okay. And then if you set this variable type to a name, compile it and save, we can set this text to whatever we want. So let's say I do Joe. Okay. I can we can take this and put right here because we don't need it anymore. Off of pressed, hover over the line, and when it like shines like this, hold Alt and left click. It's going to delete that node. I'm gonna delete that connection. I could just drag F over here, and then what I could do is I can do a print string, and I can print whatever text from this name I want. So I can just drag this in here. It won't work, so I have to drag it out here and get it, and then drag it in, and it's going to convert it to a string because it's a different variable. It has to convert to a string. If I click compile and save, and I click F, it's going to say Joe. Okay. Now we can also do the exact same thing, but switch this to a string. And it's going to say, do you want to change variable type? This could break connections. Just click change variable type. Let's get it compile. I'll close this off, compile it, save it. It's going to say it's an error because it was connected to a name. So we basically kind of broke the code because we just changed it from a name to a string right when it was connecting to this thing right here. And a string wouldn't convert. If that kind of makes sense, we kind of just change the name, so it's kind of broken. So just delete this and then re-put the string in now that it's a different variable. And then we can delete this right here because we don't need to convert it. Because it's a string and this is a string, it's just going to go in perfectly like so. Compile and save. And it should still work. However, we never set the name, so I'll just call this a string. Compile and save. Click play. And it should be saying whatever you put the string value to. And then once again, let's just delete the code this time so it's easier to change the variable. We could set it to a text. So as you can see, text strings and names are all kind of the same. So just get it. And I can drag this in here and convert it. And if I compile this, it's still going to be a string because it's compiled as what it was before. And save it. I click play. I'm going to click F. It's going to say string. So I hope that kind of made sense, guys. That's basically all the basic variables I want to teach you guys today. But basically, a variable is literally just a placeholder for a value that you can use. So instead of having to call a certain value all the time, you can just have a variable for that value, and you can change the value whenever you want, and you can do anything like it, like printing strings. So a good example is like if you wanted to calculate your health, you would need something to define your health. So you'd make a variable called a health, and it could be like a float, for example, and you would just set that to that number, and you could do different things off of it. In fact, let's use that as an example right now. Let's create a simple health variable. Okay. So I'm just going to delete all of this code right here because we don't really need it anymore. Okay. And just click backspace or delete on your keyboard to delete it. And then let's add a new variable. Well, first I'm going to delete these variables because we don't need them anymore. Just left click on it and delete. Add a new variable and just call this health. Now you could use an integer on the variable type. The reason I'm going to use a float is because this way we can also use decimals too. It's just more flexible. So click float and then compile this. So let's say health equals 100, okay? Alright, so what you can do is right click, new variable, and right click, look for like 1 on your keyboard. And then off of pressed, what I could do is we can change the value of this variable of health. So by default it's 100. Let's say whenever I click 1, I want to subtract 10 health from health and then print that. So if I hold control to get this, and then I also hold Alt to set it. Basically we want to set to take away from health. What you need to do is you need to set health to itself minus 10. So if it's 100 and I set it to 100 minus 10, or whatever damage I want to use, it's going to equal 90, okay? So let's say I want to do off of here, so off of health right here, we need to set it to a subtract. And then basically we could put health minus whatever we put in here is the amount of damage. We can create a separate variable for damage. Let's call it damage, and you can make it a float. And the reason I'm doing this is if I want to change damage inside the code, I don't have to redo this value. It's just going to change because it's in a variable. It's more flexible. So I could drag this in here. So health minus damage. And let's say I compile this and set damage to 10 for now. Basically, every time I click 1, it's going to be subtracting 10 damage. And then off of here, we can do a print string. And then we can drag this health into the string, like so. Let's convert it into a string. So compile and save. When I click 1, it's going to say 90 because health is 100. Now it's 90 because we subtracted 10. Now it's going to say 80, 70, 60, and so on. And then it can even get into the negatives. So one last thing I want to teach you guys how to do is we can make the player die once health gets to 0. So if I hold B left click for a branch, what I can do to check, every time I delete some of my health, I can check if my health is less than or equal to 0. So I can drag out my health and get a less than or equal to, less equal right here. If it's less than or equal to 0, so if it got to 0 or even if it's less than 0, we want to actually kill the player. So alpha true, look up a destroy actor. Now basically this is a default function inside of Unreal Engine that destroys whatever actor is inside this blueprint, and we'll learn how to make our own functions later on. But this is a character, but it's still a type of actor, okay? So this player is an actor and we're destroying that actor. So basically whenever health is less than or equal to 0, we're going to destroy the player, and we're always going to check if our health is less than or equal to 0 whenever we click 1. So whenever we click 1, we're going to subtract 10 health, and then we're going to print that health onto a string, and then if our health is equal to or less than 0, we're going to destroy the character, okay? So compile and save. If I click play, if I click 1, it's going to say 90, then 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. If I click it again, our character is now gone, and we have no control over the screen because the player is deleted, so your screen's going to be kind of frozen. I'm going to escape. So that is, guys, that is basically how you use variables. You guys learned the very basics of blueprints. You were able to make a health system, add your own variables, and I hope you guys could see how variables and printing strings are very helpful for debugging, and variables are very helpful for coding in general. So thanks guys for watching. Make sure to wishlist Kira Legends on Steam. It's almost out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.